Your brain is lying to you right now, this very moment. And it's so good at lying that you don't even know it's happening. The lie is simple, elegant, and completely convincing. You exist as a continuous, unified self. But here's what neuroscience has discovered. That self, that feeling of being a consistent you from moment to moment, it's a construction. A story your brain tells itself. An illusion so seamless that calling it an illusion feels absurd. Yet every time researchers look closer, every time they peer into the actual mechanics of how the brain creates the sense of self, they find the same thing. There's nobody home. No central command center. No little person sitting in your head piloting the body. Just a collection of separate neural networks, firing in patterns, creating the overwhelming impression that someone is here. Think about this. Right now, you feel like you're reading these words, like there's a you receiving this information. But what's actually happening? Light hits your retina. Electrical signals travel through neural pathways. Different parts of your brain activate. Pattern recognition occurs. Meaning gets constructed. And somewhere in all of that, the feeling arises. I am reading. But who is the I in that sentence? Where does it live? When researchers go looking for it, they can't find it. They find brain activity. Lots of it. Different regions lighting up, communicating, processing. But no central self. No unified consciousness sitting somewhere coordinating it all. What they find instead is something wild. Your brain is constantly generating the feeling of being a self. Moment to moment. It's not that you are a self. It's that your brain is continuously creating the experience of being a self. There's a difference. A massive difference. It's like a movie. 24 individual frames per second, each one static, but played in sequence. Your brain perceives continuous motion. The motion isn't real. It's an illusion created by rapid succession of still images. But the illusion is so perfect, you can't see the individual frames. You just see the movie. Your sense of self works the same way. Moment to moment, your brain is creating snapshots of experience. Sensations, thoughts, memories, emotions, and it strings them together into a narrative. This is me. This has always been me. This will continue to be me. The narrative feels real, feels continuous, feels like truth, but it's not. It's a story. A useful story maybe, but a story nonetheless. Here's where it gets interesting. There's a part of the brain called the default mode network. It's a collection of regions that activate when you're not focused on anything particular, when you're just existing, thinking about yourself, remembering, planning, mind wandering, all the stuff that makes up your internal experience of being you. And researchers have found something fascinating. When this network is highly active, the sense of self is strong. You feel like a distinct, separate individual. You have a clear sense of me versus not me. You have a story about who you are, what you want, where you're going. But when this network quiets down, the sense of self diminishes. Sometimes dramatically, people report feeling boundless, connected to everything. No separation between self and world. No sense of being a distinct individual. Just being. This happens naturally in deep meditation. The default mode network activity decreases, and experienced meditators consistently report the same thing. The self dissolves, not as a concept, as an experience. The feeling of being a separate self literally disappears. It also happens with certain substances. Psychedelics in particular seem to disrupt the default mode network. And what do people report? Ego death, the dissolution of self, the experience of being everything and nothing at once. No boundaries, no separation, no me. And here's the kicker. When the default mode network comes back online, the self comes back. The boundaries return. The separation returns. The feeling of being an individual person returns. Like clockwork. What does that tell you? It tells you the self isn't fundamental. It's not a permanent feature of consciousness. It's a brain state, a particular pattern of neural activity. When that pattern is active, you feel like a self. When it's not, you don't. Your brain is generating the feeling of being you, constantly. And it's so good at it, so seamless, that you've never questioned it. You've assumed the feeling is reality, that you are who you think you are. But you're not. You're a process. A flowing, changing, moment-to-moment construction. There's no permanent you, no fixed self. Just patterns of neural activity creating the convincing illusion that someone is here. And your brain does this for a reason. Evolution didn't build brains for truth. It built them for survival. And survival requires a sense of self, a sense of being a distinct organism that needs to protect itself, feed itself, reproduce itself. Without that sense, you wouldn't take care of the body. You wouldn't avoid danger. You wouldn't do anything. So your brain creates a self, a character, a protagonist in the story of your life, and it makes that character feel real, feel permanent, feel like the center of everything, because that's what keeps the organism alive. By the way, our shared space of light and awareness is on its way to 100,000 people. Thank you to everyone who subscribes and brings this moment closer. But here's the thing. Just because the self is useful doesn't mean it's real. Just because your brain creates it doesn't mean you have to believe it. And when you start to see through the illusion, when you recognize that the self is a construction, something fundamental shifts. You're not who you think you are. You never were. You've been living inside a story your brain tells itself. And that story? It's optional. So, if the self is just neural activity, what happens when that activity gets disrupted? What happens when the story breaks down? There are case studies, lots of them. People who've had strokes affecting specific brain regions, people with certain types of brain damage. And what they report is bizarre, not painful, not tragic, bizarre. Some people lose the ability to recognize their own body parts. They look at their arm and say, "That's not my arm." They know intellectually it's attached to them, but the feeling of ownership, of "this is mine," is gone. The neural network that creates that feeling has been damaged, and without it, the arm is just there, not theirs. Others lose the sense of being the author of their actions. They move their hand, but they don't feel like they moved it. Something moved it. They're just watching. The sense of agency, of "I did that," requires specific neural activity. When that activity is disrupted, agency disappears. Actions still happen. But nobody feels like they're doing them. Still others lose autobiographical memory. They can't remember their past, can't tell you who they are, where they came from, what they've done. And without memory, the self crumbles. Because who are you without your history, without your story? Just present moment awareness with no context, no identity, no continuity. Each of these cases shows the same thing. The self isn't a thing. It's a collection of neural functions working together to create the impression of a thing. Damage one function, and part of the self disappears. Damage another, and another part goes. The self is modular, constructed, assembled from pieces. And when all the pieces work together, you get the seamless feeling of being a unified person. But it's like a watch, beautiful, functional, appears to be one thing. But take it apart, and you see it's made of hundreds of separate components. Remove one gear, and the watch stops working. Remove another, and something else breaks. Your self is the same. It's not one thing. It's many things working in coordination to create the experience of one thing. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Meditation. Long-term meditation practice changes the brain, physically changes it. The default mode network becomes less active. The boundaries between brain regions become less rigid. Activity becomes more integrated, more fluid. And meditators report exactly what you'd expect if the self is just neural activity. The more they practice, the less solid the self feels. It becomes transparent, permeable. Sometimes it disappears entirely. Not as a belief, as a lived experience. They're not imagining this. Brain scans confirm it. When experienced meditators enter deep states, the default mode network goes quiet. The parts of the brain that create the sense of self reduce their activity dramatically. And the meditator experiences what spiritual traditions have been describing for thousands of years. No self. Emptiness. Pure awareness without a personal center. Western science is discovering what Eastern wisdom has known forever. The self is empty. Not empty like nothing is there. Empty like it has no inherent existence. It's dependently originated. It arises based on conditions. Change the conditions and it changes. Remove the conditions and it disappears. This is why psychedelics are so interesting to researchers right now. They're tools for temporarily disrupting the neural patterns that create the self. And in that disruption, people see through the illusion. They experience directly what meditators spend years training to experience. The self is constructed. Not real, not permanent, just a pattern. And when people come back from those experiences, they're changed, not because they learned something intellectually, because they saw it directly. The self they thought was real, permanent, solid, gone, dissolved, revealed as temporary. And if it can disappear, if it can come and go based on brain states, then it was never what they thought it was. This is profoundly unsettling for some people. Because if there's no permanent self, then who am I? If I'm just a temporary pattern of neural activity, then what happens when I die? If the self is an illusion, then what's the point of anything? But others find it liberating. Because if the self is constructed, then it's not fixed. You're not trapped in who you think you are. The story can change. The identity can shift. The boundaries can dissolve. You're not a thing. You're a process. And processes are fluid, dynamic, alive. The neuroscience doesn't answer every question. It can't tell you what awareness is. It can't explain the hard problem of consciousness. But it can tell you this. Whatever you are, you're not what you think you are. The self you experience, the you reading these words, is being generated by your brain. And when the brain stops generating it, either through death or through disruption, it goes away. That should change everything. It should change how you see yourself, how you relate to others, how you move through the world. Because if everyone is a temporary construction, a pattern with no permanent substance, then what are we actually doing? What are we defending? What are we trying to prove? So what do you do with this information? How do you live once you know the self is just neural activity? Does everything become meaningless? Do you stop caring? Do you become passive? No. What happens is something different. You stop living in the story and start living in direct experience, because the story is what the brain generates. But direct experience is what's actually happening. Right now, there's seeing, there's hearing, there's sensation, there's thinking. All of this is happening. The experience is real. But the story about who's experiencing it, that's optional. That's the brain's addition. And you can learn to see the difference. When you're identified with the self, every experience is filtered through the question, what does this mean for me? You're not experiencing things directly. You're experiencing them in relation to the story of who you are. Does this threaten me? Benefit me? Align with my identity? Contradict it? That's exhausting. Every moment becomes about maintaining and defending the self, about making sure the story stays consistent, about protecting the character you think you are. But when you see through the self, when you recognize it's just neural activity creating a convincing illusion, something lightens. You can experience things without the constant self-reference, without the need to make everything about you, because there's no permanent you to make it about. This doesn't mean you become dysfunctional. The brain still does what it needs to do. The body still gets fed. Relationships still happen. Work still gets done. But it's not burdened by the weight of a self that needs to be somebody, prove something, achieve something to be valid. You become more like water, responsive, adaptive, taking the shape of whatever container you're in, but not clinging to any particular shape, moving where life moves you, without resistance, without the friction that comes from defending a fixed identity. And here's what's beautiful. Your brain already knows how to do this. Because the self is something your brain creates, it can also let it go. You don't have to kill the ego. You just have to see it for what it is. A useful tool, a pattern of neural activity, not the truth of what you are. When you're driving, the brain creates the sense of, I'm driving, fine, useful, helps you pay attention and respond appropriately. But when you're done driving, you don't need to carry that sense with you. The brain can let it go. The self as driver dissolves, and you're just here. No role, no identity, just awareness. Same with everything else. The self is parent, the self is worker, the self is friend. These are all patterns the brain activates when needed, but they're not you. They're temporary constructions. And when you see that, you stop being imprisoned by them. You can be a parent without thinking, I am a parent defines you. You can work without thinking, my job is who I am. You can relate to people without needing them to confirm your identity, because identity itself is seen as fluid, optional, constructed moment to moment. This is what no self actually means. Not that nothing exists, but that no thing exists as a permanent, independent self. Everything is flowing. Everything is connected. Everything is arising based on conditions, including the sense of being you. And when you live from that understanding, life becomes simpler. Not easier, simpler, because you're not adding the layer of self-reference to everything. You're not making everything about maintaining and defending an identity. You're just responding to what's actually happening, directly, immediately, without the filter. The neuroscience confirms what mystics have been saying for millennia. The self is empty, not empty like nothing is there. Empty like it has no inherent, independent existence. It's real as an experience, but it's not what it appears to be. It's a construction, a magic trick the brain performs so well that even you are fooled. But you don't have to stay fooled. You can see through it, not by thinking about it, not by believing it, but by looking directly at your experience, watching how the sense of self arises, watching how it dissolves, watching how it's never actually solid, never actually permanent, never actually what it claims to be. Your brain will keep generating it. That's fine. That's what brains do. But you don't have to believe it. You don't have to live inside it. You can see it happening and not be trapped by it. That's the liberation. Not from having a self, but from believing the self is real, from being identified with it, from thinking you are the story your brain tells itself. You're not the story. You're the awareness in which the story appears. And that awareness, that's not generated by the brain. That's what the brain arises in. That's what's here before the self gets constructed and after it dissolves. The neuroscience can't prove this, can't measure awareness itself, but it can show you that everything you thought was permanent about yourself is actually temporary. Everything you thought was solid is actually fluid. Everything you thought was you is actually just neural activity in motion. And when you see that, when you really see it, not as an idea, but as a lived reality, you're free. Free to be whoever and whatever this moment calls for. Free to change. Free to flow. Free to stop defending something that was never real in the first place. If this video changed something in you, write in the comments, "I see the construction." Write it as your recognition that the self is built, not born. Nobody,